You, how's it going? It's Nima. I figured I'd make you a really quick video about some of these things. So you had, let's write it down here. You had like a couple different questions. The first question you had was about this binding. So we'll take a look at what that is. This is actually going to be like the last thing we look at. Then the other questions that you had was about props and state. Um, we'll start with that, props and state first. What you're seeing here is two different components. One of them is a class component called app, and then the other one's a class component called name tag. And all you really need to know about these two is that they have a render method. And my render method is what says what gets written to the screen. And so for my app, it says, oh, draw to the screen a div, and then 4 name tags. And then these are my name tags. You say hello Nima, but I could write, Shinyu in here, and it'll pop that up. Now, I don't want it always to say Shinyu. I don't want it always to say Nima. I want it to say something custom, like hello name. And what I could do in order to pass a name through here is I might go, oh, name equals, Nima. Oops, there you go. Or, this one might say name equals Shinyu. And notice sort of two things. One of them is that it didn't work. That's the first thing. And then the second thing you should note is I wrote it in here sort of like a HTML attribute. The only difference is I used these curly braces. Unfortunately, I can't just grab name like that. What I have to do is instead go this.props.name. And that's sort of it. That's really everything you need to know about props. It's a value from higher up being passed down to a component. And so this one's like, oh, use a name tag, but with the name Nima. And name gets passed in through this.props.name. If I wanted to put in something like, you are, age years old. We've learned that if I want the value to show up, I have to go this.props.age. That's the first part of it. And then the other half of this is I have to go age. So Nima is, and here I might go like 67 years old. And now that value is passed in. Note it's only being used when it's available. So here it's blank, blank. And that's it. People will try and make props seem like they're more complicated than this. It's not. A prop is like a present to a component. So I'm just going to say here props are any value that you want to pass in to a component. Right? I like to think of custom values. And so these could be, numbers, strings, functions, right? Any value. I like to say that a props are something you give to a component. And then on the other hand, state is something a component knows about itself. We're going to come to this in a second. Okay, something a component knows about itself. So for this, I'm going to have to make a new component for this example. This is called, counter. And maybe what I want to show for my counter is a button. And maybe this button will be number is 0 or something like that. Right? Or I might even go curly braces, number is number. And I'm going to say something like, oh, when you click the button, it's going to do something. Okay, we'll get to that part in a second. I want this number not to be something that gets passed down to my counter, right, when I use it. So let's go counter here. This is going to be a value that my counter knows about itself, right? It's not something that's given to it, it's something that it keeps track of. And so we call that state. The way that we define state in React, and this is one way to do this, right? There's other forms of writing React, so if the code that you have from your class looks different from this, just message me and we can talk and I'll make a different example for you. But this is the way that I think you're doing it in your course. We have to start off by doing this part. I'm not going to explain what this is right now. You can reach out to me if you want an explanation of that line. But the only part that I want you to care about right now here is I have to go this dot state equals, and I can do something like number and start it off at 0. And you'll notice now that, it doesn't work yet, but I can go this dot, and where we would have done this dot props dot name or this dot props dot age because it was being passed in, with my counter, because it's in my state, I go this dot state dot number. And now you'll see that the number actually shows up. And I can change that value. I can go 10, and now it's 10. Fine. And, you can do whatever you want with that. The more interesting part comes when I want to change this value. And now here's where we're going to start talking about this binding. There is this concept of this, which in JavaScript can be a little confusing. Usually this, I like to think of it as what context is the code running in, or rather, who called this code. And so in React, we want the value of, this to be the component. Like, I want to be able to always go, oh, this dot, and that should be a reference to the name tag or the counter. I know that feels maybe a little weird. It's something you're gonna get used to over time. But in this example here, like this dot state, it means my state, right? My state number. And so, one of the ways that we want to be able to handle ourselves is maybe have functions like increase number. Or maybe this function is supposed to be like, when you click the button, increase the number. And I might use that. I might go, oh, button on click, then run my increase number function. The value of using something like this is not going to be very obvious yet until I do something like have multiple counters. So if I have 2 counters, the way you can read this is that this says, for my component, when you click on this button, I want you to run increase number on my number. Not on everybody's number, but only on my number, right? Because each component is going to think in its own, my way. And so here I might go something like, how do I increase the number? When you look inside of how to use state in React, you're often going to find this set state function. And so, maybe your class has talked about this a little bit, so I'm just going to use an example here. I'll go, where's my code? There it is. Set state. It'll have to be this dot set state. And then in here, I'm going to want to say something like, oh, set the number to whatever my current, so my state's number is, plus 1. I'm not going to actually do this code yet. I'll comment this out for a moment. because I want you to look at two strange things. Inside of my constructor, I'm going to say console log this is, and then print out this. And so we'll look at the console, and it says this is counter. Cool. And I'll do it again. Let me get rid of one of these counters, by the way, just so that we only see it print once. I'm going to do the same thing inside of my render function. Right, so in the constructor, I'll say something like constructor this is, and here I'll go render this is, and notice that for the constructor, this is counter. For the render, this is counter. Works fine, right? That's saying that the value of this is my component. But if I do the same thing inside of here, inside of my increase number function, and I go inside of the increase number function, this is, interestingly, when I click on the button to run that function, I'll see that the constructor says this is counter, render says this is counter, increase number says this is window. Blech. Unfortunately, you can kind of think of this as a bug or like a really annoying part of React. Just the way that JavaScript works is that when you use like one of these like click handlers or something like that, the value of this gets broken. And instead of it remaining as the counter, it'll turn into the window. Which is really annoying because the window doesn't have set state. In order to be able to go this dot set state, I need this to be counter. And so what we have to do is we actually have to force the value of this for the increase number function. And so I go here and I say, okay, let's actually do this up here. This dot increase number equals this dot increase number, so nothing's changed, dot bind, and I can bind it to anything. I could go bind it to hello world, and you'll actually find that when I look at the thing here, it says the constructor, this is counter, render, this is counter, and when I go number is, it'll say increase number, this is hello, I have to go with that, hello world. It'll just kind of print itself really weird. I don't want to do hello world though. I want to bind it to the counter, and so I'll go bind it to whatever the value of this was at the moment. And now I see constructor, this is counter, render, this is counter, and for increase number, this is counter. And that's sort of it. Now I can actually call this dot set state, and when I click on this number, it goes up. And I can have, like I said, multiple counters. So let's just do that, just so that I have two counters. And they're going to be like individually increasing. There you go. My computer's slowing down quite a bit. And, really, that's about it. I know that this could be like a pretty confusing example. I'm going to give you the code, mess around with it, and if you have questions about this, then message me and we can keep going deeper into this. I don't want you to think that this is more complicated than it is. To sum it up, every time that you have a method inside of a class that needs the word this for whatever reason, make sure that in your constructor you do this dot bind this. That's just it. Because if you don't do that, then your function's just going to break. I hope this helped. this was a bit longer than I wanted to make it, but sometimes that happens. Have a great week, I guess, and good luck with your projects. Let me know if you've got any questions about this.